Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you for being here, showing interest in ethics and quality. So, this is my 21st year in software development, and I've seen the tides come and go. I started out as a developer in '99, and back in those days, we didn't have testers or business analysts or front-end developers, database people. We had software developers, at least where I worked, in the business area where I worked. So I grew up thinking that's how you did programming. You did all the requirement analysis, all the design, all the coding, all the testing. You trained your users, and then you created the disks and you sent them out. So, of course, there were drawbacks to that. I can't say I'm the best business analyst in the world. And I'm certainly not the best database optimizer in the world. So, over the years, the tides shifted more into people being specialized. So suddenly I realized that I was working full-time as a tester. Of course, I knew when the role shifted, but for the sake of drama, let's assume I just woke up one day and realized it. So suddenly I was in a team where we had one person being fantastic at optimizing database queries. And we had a couple of people who were just fantastic at designing interfaces. And we had the annoying one, being me, posing all the annoying questions, all the critical assessments of the system, saying why, how, who. And this had a lot of benefits, but it also had a lot of drawbacks. And then, of course, Agile came along, and we shifted back. And I've heard people say that they think we're gonna shift even more, but I'm starting to get old, so I'm thinking this is just a pendulum that's gonna keep swinging until we find, hopefully at some point in time, we find a balance. So, I'm a developer who shifted into testing because I love good testing. And when I say good testing, I'm not talking about like a horde of testing monkeys just checking off test cases, or another horde just automating scripts. I'm talking about that almost inexplicable instinct that tells you what question to ask at what point in time to someone and find that invisible hole in the solution. That's good testing to me. So, thankfully for you, I'm not going to talk about testing today. I'm going to talk about quality in like a bigger sense. So, Jerry Weinberg, who unfortunately passed away last year, 2 years back, he defined quality as value to someone who matters. So that's the definition we're going to stick to today. So I'm not just talking about testing when I'm talking about quality. And as I said, I'm talking about testing in the sense of critical assessment of something. I'm not talking about step-by-step test cases that you check off and you deliver a report that you have 97% code coverage. And I'm also going to talk about ethics in the sense of dealing with good or bad, moral duty, obligation. So I'm going to be ranting a bit. I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to tell you a fictional story about a team. This is Ian, our junior developer. We have Sam, senior, very tech-savvy developer. Alex is our business analyst. He's very engaged. He likes working with the team. He really likes the agile mindset where he can like pair with people and just collaborate on the solution. We have our tester, Morgan. Morgan comes from the school of testing, believing in testing not as a gatekeeper, but an information provider. So in Morgan's reality, he doesn't make decisions. He just hands information to someone that makes the decision. In his world, that person is Kim. Kim is the project manager of this project. And as all of my bad ideas about project managers, Kim loves taking risks. He's a born risk taker. He goes by the motto, it's better to ask for forgiveness than approval, of course. And then we have Chris. Chris is kind of the odd bird of the group, because Chris is actually a user of the system. So our story starts out with Ian. Ian is, as I said, junior. Very new to the team, on a 6-month trial period at work. So as a part of his introduction, he's given a story that is labeled as easy. So this is a good, easy task for you to start with. The problem is that Ian doesn't really understand it. He finds a lot of contradictions and has a question, but is really, really uncomfortable asking those questions. Both out of fear of looking silly, but also because they really, really need this job to work. So they decide just to go along with some assumption, and as a consequence of that, the implementation of this feature is just slightly off. It's not a big deal. I think we've all done it. And then we have Sam. Sam found a feature that would allow him to try something new. A new library or framework that's really had his eyes on for a while and wanted to try out. So he picked the perfect story to try this out. Unfortunately, they didn't really time box this, so they spent a lot of the sprint or the iteration trying to get this working as they wanted, and in the end they had to do a quick and dirty solution. So we ended up with technical debt and also a library that the other people in the team didn't really understand. Also, not a big deal. I think we've done it. So at one point, Sam and Alex are pairing together over a story. They are working really collaboratively. They are trying different things, they are making small adjustments, and they decide to change something in how this story is to be implemented. And of course, one-on-one communication is the best way. No handovers. You can discuss it. There'll be no misunderstandings. But unfortunately, they don't document this in any way. So we end up with different team members understanding this feature in different ways. It's still not a big deal, right? All of these are just small things. Morgan, while he's testing, finds a weird edge case. It's something that could potentially be very bad for the customer, but the odds of it happening aren't that big. So, since Morgan believes in passing information to management. That's just what they do. And they are pressured into not reporting the bug. Because, well, they just decided to follow orders. So a bad bug is not raised to the team and it's not fixed. Because Kim likes to take risks. So Morgan came to Kim with this potential issue. And Kim did some risk analysis in his head and thought, well, the cost of delay would be really high and the odds are pretty low. I'm going to just put some pressure on Morgan and see how important this risk really is. And Morgan backed off. So Kim thought, well, the risk couldn't be that bad. So Kim decides not to take this up with the steering group. So the bad bug goes into production. Well, this is not a really important application, so it doesn't really matter. Kim starts using it. So as a consequence of all of these chains of choices, Chris' data is leaked. There's not really sensitive information in this system. It's not that bad. Username, password. Of course, Chris uses the same username and password on other sites because users. So the result of all of these small decisions is that Chris' identity is stolen. So this is a fictional story. And I'm going to switch to some real ones just to show that this is actually things that happen all the time. And since I like drama, I'm going to start with Boeing. And I'm going to try not to stay here for 40 minutes. So, does everyone know about the Boeing accidents? So, 2 airplanes crashed in a pretty short span of time. And it seems to be because of similar problems. But I'm going to back up 10 years ago. Airbus announced that they were going to produce a new airplane. Better for the climate, better fuel efficiency, lower costs. And Boeing, of course, scrambled to keep up. So in order to meet this new threat, they decided to take their old Boeing 737 and just make it better. So they increased the size of the engines, which for some weird reason I don't understand makes it more fuel efficient. It also makes the engines heavier. So in order to fix that, they moved it on the wings. But moving the engines on the wings meant that the plane shifted in balance. So in order to fix that, they decided to implement a system to adjust for the imbalances, because this airplane kind of wants to tilt upwards with the nose up. So they introduced the MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Sounds really professional, right? So this system basically reads 2 sensors, and if the angle between those are too high, it's going to try to push the nose downwards automatically. Well, okay, moving on to the crash S. So in both cases, there seem to have been faults in the sensors. So the sensors reported a potential too high angle. This triggered the MCAS, of course, and the MCAS tries to push the nose downwards. And as an added bonus, the pilots are taken completely unaware of this. They are just taken by surprise, because this is out of their control. and they crashed. But there are a lot of things involved in this crash. So the pilots were not adequately trained because the regulating organization decided that the old Boeing and the new Boeing were so alike that they just had to take like a short training. But in reality, the planes acted completely different while in air. There was a warning light to show that the sensors weren't working properly as an optional buy-in. So none of the airplanes had that. That's been fixed. We can also see when we start digging that the organization that decides if an airplane is okay to fly or not, they pushed their engineers to approve this airplane. And you can see by the communication that there were a lot of engineers that didn't want to, but they pushed for it anyway. And also we can see that the safety assessment Boeing sent in was riddled with inconsistencies and errors. So this isn't just about a sensor being wrong or someone designing engines in the wrong way. This is a long chain of probably small decisions at the time that ended up with hundreds of people dead. And I don't know how many millions lost because all of the Boeing 737 MAX 8S were grounded for a long time. Of course, the competition is much better. Airbus has a certain model of their airplanes with one particular version of the software that would crash. The reason behind it is that there's an internal clock that's very, very, very slightly off, but over time that inconsistency grows. But the solution is just to turn it off and on again. So it's yeah, but it's actually way cheaper and less risky to just reboot it instead of taking them all in, updating it, and testing it again. But this is, I think it's 3 or 4 years that they've been doing this. If you've come to my talk before, you've heard about the Mars Climate Orbiter. It's my absolute favorite. Have you heard of it? No? Awesome. In 1998, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter. The purpose was to study Mars, to gain a lot of data that would later be used in the Mars Polar Lander that would land on Mars. So NASA built a lot of the software themselves, and then they sent some of the software to Lockheed. And Lockheed is an American company, I believe. The requirements very clearly states that we should use the metric system. Lockheed didn't. So we ended up with very expensive toy where one part of the software is calculating things in Newton seconds and another part of the system is using pound force seconds. What happened? Well, once it came close to Mars, its trajectory brought it too close to Mars, and either it crashed on Mars or it just went into space. So in this case, we ended up with $450 million literally lost in space. So who do we blame for this? Is it just Lockheed who didn't follow the specifications? No. Actually, NASA takes this on themselves because they realized that they could have found this by just better checking or better testing. some more weird information about this is that this inconsistency was actually found and reported by at least 2 people before this happened. But their reports were rejected because they didn't follow the proper documentation protocol. There was also a meeting where the attendees, they like, well, we did agree on something. We did agree on adjusting this trajectory, but it was never actually executed. So again, lots and lots of small decisions along the way ended up with lots of money wasted. Okay, I'm gonna bring us back to Earth, almost. Skolplattformen. Do you have kids in Stockholm here? Yay! I don't even know where to start. Over a period of 5 years, this system was in development. In 2013, they took the decision to actually start building the requirements for the systems and making sure to get the right deliverers for each of the parts. In 2015, they made a political decision to actually start building it. And in 2018, it went live. So totally against all of the once-a-day delivery that we're hopefully more accustomed to. But they decided to build it in a modular sense. So they had some parts right. Different modules could be potentially built by different companies. So what did we end up with? Well, I think the most famous one is the big security gap, where people could, with some programming skills, access the data of potentially all the students in entire Stockholm area. Which is actually really interesting because security is one of the few non-functional requirements that were in the requirements. It also had a lot of performance issues that you could quite clearly see that you hadn't tested it with any load at all. There were so many bugs, which is also, again, pretty weird because they had pilot groups that tested it. And I'm not talking about hard to find bugs, I'm talking about very, very obvious bugs. And this, of course, is a consequence of the public sector buying software without knowing anything about software. So it's...
I don't interrupt, but I have to. Did they hire Belgians to do that?
I don't know.
In Belgium, it's for everything. It's a typical Belgian solution.
The companies I know about are actually Swedish, but I don't know. I'm not gonna... I can't promise not. But I mean, this software was bought on a price basis. Of course, because that's how the public sector works. And this is a big issue. I have a couple of more examples where it went wrong. 1177, Vårdguiden, where 3 million calls to the health care system were found unencrypted on a server. And again, this is not because someone chose to put all that data there. It's because 1177 uses one company to handle the calls, so they have a call center. That company is Swedish and situated in Sweden. They, on the other hand, uses another company to handle uncomfortable hours, which is owned by Swedish people, but it's registered in Thailand. They hire another company for their cloud solution. And a sister company to that company owns the actual server where the calls were found. And I mean, I can imagine the choices made along the way just to cut cost. Only 55 calls were downloaded, and they were downloaded by Computer Sweden as just a test to see if they can do it, as far as we know. But they also found other stuff on this server that the company that owned those calls hadn't even any knowledge that the calls were saved, because they were just wanted them to throw them away. So much of our data is just unprotected out there. And the University Hospital in Örebro, they bought a system from America. I'm sorry. I don't dislike everything about America. I love you. But they didn't think of Swedish characters. So once the nurse or whoever takes notes, she started entering notes about the patient during the examination, and the machine that measures blood pressure and heart rates just froze. And I mean, it can happen. It's a relief that this examination wasn't life-threatening in any way. I can imagine if this had been when I was delivering my first child, I was losing blood, they were checking me constantly. If that would have been the time where all the machinery froze, I might not be standing here. This patient, fortunately, just had to retake the examination. But what I find worst about this is that people actually knew about this, and they are still using the system. And the solution from the company is that they just remove the keys. So our software can do a lot of harm. And of course, I pick examples that are over the top, but small choices that we make have impact. So the ACM, the Association for Computer Machinery, they have a conduct for people like us. And I would actually urge you to look at it, but here are a few quotes. We as professionals, we have potential to change the world, and we need to be responsible and think of greater good when we build software. So the code includes principles or like statements, and those statements are based on the principle that we should always have the public good in our primary consideration. I'm sure you all do that 8 hours a day. But I mean, this is just some rules to live by, but how do we do it? Well, I'm gonna quote Fiona Charles from Quality Intelligence. And she has written down and published 10+1 commandments for ethical techies. And the first one is to understand your basic professional obligation. You are not just there to produce lines of code. You are there for some bigger reason. You need to know whatever specific legal or contractual obligations you have. It's not okay to say that you didn't know something because it wasn't in the requirements. If you are handling data in any way, you need to at least know the basics of GDPR. If you are working with, I don't know, banking, you need to know about Solvency II, MiFID. It is actually an obligation you have to know the basics. And you need to know your own ethical bottom line, because we all have different ones. I probably have run against it a few times where I had to take a stand. And my bottom line is more of a table, I would say. No, it's not a floor, it's a table. I have I have a lot of ethical and moral principles. And we need to understand whose interests our work serves. And this is not the stockholders. This is not the owners of the company. These are the people that will be affected by our software. And we need to understand that. Because we need to know what harm our software can actually do. And not only what harm can the software do while the users are using it, but what can the data be misused for? How can someone misuse the data and the information and the services that we provide? And in order to do that, we need to have critical awareness of the whole situation at work. So we can't just sit there focusing on our little service. We need to know the entire solution and the ecosystem that we live in. And we need to be good at saying no. We can't be Morgan and say someone else's decision. We need to actually say no when we believe something is wrong. Which means we need to be good at speaking truth, which can be very uncomfortable, but we need to explain to people why we believe something to be right or wrong. And we need to know how to escalate things. Because at some point we're going to run across a wall where we are not enough anymore. We need to have someone with more power or more money or more say to get the message across. And we need to know our own tolerance, because this can be risky. I don't think you will be hunted down by assassins by saying no, but you might risk losing your job because you refuse to do something. And of course, it's easy for me, privileged, standing here saying, well, I would rather lose my job than do that. Other people might have lower tolerance, and we need to be aware of that. And as a bonus, if you run across this, document everything. Leave a paper trail to protect you if something does go wrong. So, 11 commandments that could hopefully help you be more ethical. So I have 15 minutes and I'm gonna just talk a bit about what I actually promised to talk about. Namely, the problems with delivering more, faster, cheaper. So we are asked to cut corners all the time. You agree? And have you read Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman? So just a quick just quickly about that. So his principle is that we are guided by two different systems, system 1 and system 2, or the rabbit and the tortoise. And when we are forced to do things fast, make quick decisions, cut corners, we are pushing ourselves more and more into system 1. Because system 1 is automatic, it's instinct, it's fast, it cuts corners. And system 2 is slow and conscious and aware, and it's considerate. System 1 thinks it can handle stuff, even when it doesn't, which leads us to making mistakes. Because system 1 is judgmental, it relies on instincts and experiences and assumptions. It can be primed. So if you've been drinking Coca-Cola for 2 days, you are more likely to pick Coca-Cola as the soda the next time, because you're primed to it. If you've been talking about boats, you're more likely to pick the story that's about boats. It's inclined to pick things that are familiar. So if you know how to solve a problem one way, you're gonna pick that way. if you're forced. It's bias to confirmation, so it tries to confirm its beliefs rather than find. It kind of ignores everything that goes against its beliefs. And it has an amazing ability to, when it comes across a problem that's too complex to solve, it will give you the answer to an easier one. Do we want to use that for every decision we make daily? Please no. But switching to system 2 takes energy, and it drains us. But it also makes better decisions in the long run. So I want you to think about, when you go back to work, why are you delivering fast? Are you delivering fast because you believe in small deliveries equal low cost? So it's safer to deliver more often? Or are you delivering often because you want to cut costs? Are you doing it because you want to fail fast, to learn fast? Or are you doing it to get your product on the market quickly to make profit? We want to have shared responsibility, but we don't want to have things falling between the cracks. We want an even flow, which we get by small deliveries. But in reality, what I see is often constant pressure instead of an even flow. So think about if your team is actually doing this out of agile principles or out of marketing and business reasons. Because a Swiss Army knife is awesome when you're camping, but if you're building a house, you probably want a toolbox. So cross-functionality is fantastic if you have a team that's actually cross-functional. But if you come across a situation where the organization thinks individuals need to be Swiss Army knives, you're going to end up building a house with less optimized tools. Shifting between these tasks that we do when we need to switch between taking on these different roles constantly, that's also a context shift. And I've heard a lot of people talk about context switching and how it's bad, but we never consider how this is also a context switch. Because it's a shift in mindset between taking on different roles. But that could be good, because shifting the mindset forces you to slow down, which forces you to go into system 2. I've also seen an issue where we have no balance between speed and mastery. So I've seen a lot of developers, they produce software that's really complex, really fast, but they don't really understand what it does. They are just pulling in libraries left to right, and they never stop to think what it actually does. And I'm not saying you should stop doing that, but find a balance. And we often hear that we need to deliver fast because our clients are expecting this. They are changing their behavior to expect changes constantly. And I just wanted to ask you, do they? Or have we primed them to that behavior by actually giving them these constant deliveries, constant gratification? So are we as software professionals actually forcing a change in our clients' behavior by acting like this? To sum it all up, it's not one big bad decision that causes Boeing to crash. It's lots and lots of small ones. And I want you to be fast or slow, as long as you make that choice for the right decisions, for the right reasons, not just to add money to someone's pocket. And I want you to think about and know your bottom line. What is the threshold that you won't pass? And I want you to never ever blame your bad decisions on someone else. If you choose not to report something or talk about something, that's your responsibility, it's not someone else's. And also never pressure others to make bad decisions. If you end up in a project management role somewhere and you decide to put pressure on poor Morgan, please don't, because that's on you. You are responsible for your own actions every day. But I also want to add that I think you're responsible for calling out other people's bad decisions. And you can make it, you don't have to make it like a confrontational, you can try to be friendly about it, but don't let it pass just because it's safer or easier or faster. And I think we all take liberties with the truth all the time. We're gonna make those bad decisions and bad choices, but try to make sure that they are the right ones that don't end up with disaster. Thank you.